This video is sponsored by WinX DVD Ripper. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is a highly divisive movie. While there are some points of excellence in it, and many find a lot to enjoy about it, there are some aspects of it that in my book wildly detracts from the movie as a whole. However, it is not as simple as blaming director Sam Raimi for having pulled another Spider-Man 3, as the aspects that did not work aren't unique to this movie so much as they are indicative of a larger producer and writer issue that affects the current face of the MCU as a whole. In this editorial, I will begin with establishing how Doctor Strange's issues are a direct continuation of WandaVision's, and how they inadvertently resulted in the total character assassination of Wanda, the Scarlet Witch. For those that may wonder, yes, there will be some mild spoilers. Before we get into that though, I know that many of you, like me, have some pretty substantial physical collections of movies, TV series, and even priceless family recordings from special occasions. And that is good. We always say, preserve your physical media. But we also say that as part of that preservation, you should consider taking digital backups as well. And for that, this video sponsor, WinX DVD Ripper, comes into the picture. Whether you want a lossless copy for your Kodi or Plex, or a smaller file in a format native to the device of your choice, or even fixed video aspect ratio and more, WinX DVD Ripper has you covered. Even DVDs that have some kind of damage which prevents them from being played back in regular players may still have their contents preserved by WinX DVD Ripper. So you can see how awesome the program is, and how many practical features it comes with. They are right now launching a giveaway event, in which you get 90 days for free of the premium version. To claim your free copy and begin preserving your physical media, click the link in the description. With that, let's go back to the beginning of Doctor Strange's issues. WandaVision was the first of the Disney Plus MCU series and the first installment of Phase 4 to be released. Leading up to its release, there was much hype surrounding it. Rumors that it would feature Mephisto as the villain, and have people transported in from the multiverse, such as Quicksilver from the X-Men universe, had many a fan very excited going in. That excitement wouldn't last though, because as the series progressed, it became clear that it was poorly paced, narratively sloppy with most of the screen time being filler, and worse still, it had no Mephisto, no multiverse, and nothing else cool. In fact, it subverted expectations in the most boring of ways possible. For those that might not have seen it, the brief summary is that in the aftermath of Endgame, Wanda is grieving the death of Vision, and to deal with this grief, she creates a fantasy world inspired by vintage sitcoms starring herself, imaginary Vision, and most importantly, her imaginary children, as well as a whole host of other imaginary supporting characters. The problem though is that these imaginary characters, for the most part, are the residents of a random town, enslaved under Wanda's spell. While they may smile because of the spell, they are suffering, prisoners in their own bodies, while Wanda uses them as toys to roleplay her imaginary perfect life. Some of them are even dying as they can't eat or drink unless Wanda ascribes them scenes in which they do that in her town-scale role-playing game. In the end though, after 9 full episodes of a whole lot less shenanigans than you'd think given the screen time, Wanda is informed that while she has been role-playing imaginary mum for her imaginary kids, real people are dying and in misery because of it. In the end, she reluctantly agrees to end her roleplay and let the town residents she enslaved go about their business. However, Wanda is dismayed to learn that the townspeople aren't grateful for her graciously returning their freedom. No, those ingrates are instead pissed that she enslaved them for days or weeks in the first place. Wanda even has to be comforted and told that the townspeople will never understand what she gave up for them. And the whole sequence is framed in such a way that we, the audience, are meant to feel very sorry for her. We don't have to agree with her actions, but the writers and producers want us, the audience, to empathize with her pain of accepting that her imaginary kids were but figments of her imagination. The writers and producers no doubt thought that their work was moving and profound. it wasn't. If they ever thought it was, which they probably did, that would be one of the indications that something has gone very, very wrong behind the scenes. Before we get into what went wrong, let's contrast that to when everything went right. Ever since its launch with Iron Man back in 2008, the MCU had gone from strength to strength. While other Hollywood producers never figured it out, the secret behind Marvel's success was pretty evident to the fans of the comics. What the MCU did was treat the movies like a TV series in which each episode is self-contained, yet furthered the larger narrative which only gradually unfolded over time. As for which narratives to feature, both in each movie as well as across movies, they selected bits and pieces from the best runs of the comics. And just so we're clear, by best runs, I mean the comic book runs which were popular with the fans, popular with reviewers, and oftentimes which increased sales and brought new readers to the titles. The point I'm making is that everything that worked in the MCU on film had already been tried and found to be successful in the pages of Marvel Comics. This is true even for the movies based on characters most people had never heard about, like the Guardians of the Galaxy. No, not all that many read Guardians of the Galaxy compared to, say, Batman or Spider-Man, but those who did read them loved them. Before the movie was even conceived of, the Guardians of the Galaxy were already a commercially successful commodity in the pages of the comics. All the movie had to do was the same as all the other movies already had done. That is, show the general movie-going audience why comic book readers loved these quirky characters in the first place. And they had the writers and directors with the appropriate sensibilities to do just that. But towards the end of the Infinity Saga, sometime during Phase 3, something happened behind the scenes. The popular and commercially successful comic book runs are all in the past now. For the past decade, there have been Marvel comic book runs which have been praised by critics for their social messaging, but none which were also popular with the comic book readers. On the contrary, as more and more activists put their stamps on the comic books in the last 5 years in particular, fewer and fewer readers chose to actually pick them up, and fewer still actually liked them. To be clear, there are still both good individual writers as well as individual titles that are good left in Marvel Comics. But too many of the current writers subscribe to a radical worldview, and that makes them unfit to write stories that appeal to general audiences. What they write appeals to fellow ideologues that share their worldview, and because of this, comic book sales from both Marvel and DC, once the titans of comics, have today plummeted to levels where both are pretty irrelevant. Instead, manga is the driving force behind the comic book market these days. Going back to the movie side of things, starting in earnest from Phase 4, Marvel abandoned their policy of adapting properties and storylines that already had commercial success in the pages of the comics. In fact, they skipped over decades worth of commercially successful fan-favorite stories, and jumped straight to the current era, which caused long-time readers to flee in the first place. Further compounding the issue, the writers and producers spearheading the current phase of the MCU share the same worldview as the very writers that bled out Marvel Comics. That's why we see so many OG heroes being replaced by female counterparts across the board. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness even introduced Clea, who eventually replaced Doctor Strange in the pages of the comics. The perhaps worst thing about Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, though, was something that was done to another female character, namely the complete character assassination of Wanda. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is the direct continuation of WandaVision, to the point where the movie won't make anywhere near as much sense if you haven't seen WandaVision first. The story is kicked off with America Chavez, a walking MacGuffin and the one individual who can travel from one universe to another within the multiverse, and she is being chased by monsters. Trying to help her out, Doctor Strange reaches out to Wanda for assistance, asking her how much she knows about the multiverse. Wanda first informs Doctor Strange that she is a bit annoyed with him because he broke the rules when he handed Thanos his Infinity Stone. It means nothing to her that he did this in a calculated move, knowing that was the only way to set in motion the very specific set of events which would ultimately lead to Thanos' defeat. No, all Wanda sees is that Doctor Strange broke the rules and was considered a hero. But when Wanda broke the rules by enslaving the inhabitants of a village, she was seen as a villain. Wanda then confesses that she is the one who sent the monsters after America Chavez in the first place, hoping to lure her to this universe, in which she will kill her and steal her multiverse-hopping powers from her. Because that way, Wanda can travel to a universe where her imaginary kids actually exist. Because Wanda is determined to live the dream of her imaginary kids singing cutesy songs for her, and she doesn't care how many other men, women, or children have to die for it. And that includes her own multiversal counterpart, the actual mother whose kids she would kidnap. The writers can try to hide behind that the Darkhold made her do it. But that doesn't change the fact that they wrote Wanda in a way that normal, non-activist people consider to be insane, evil, and stupid. Insane because she is so hell-bent on traversing the multiverse for her imaginary kids in the first place. Evil because there is no limit to the number of people she is willing to kill in order to kidnap some kids which do not need rescuing, and that she isn't remotely capable of actually looking after. And finally, stupid. Because even though she wasted years on a romantic partner who runs on batteries, nothing prevented her from starting to date and actually make a family of her own in her native universe. At least, nothing physically prevented her. Her being an Amber Heard level mental case might be an issue. The point here though is that the writers intended for her to be a tragic hero, someone so scorned by society that she became a villain before redeeming herself by taking out all the Darkholds of the multiverse. Except that to normal people, her actions made her completely irredeemable, and snuffing out the Darkholds, much like releasing the villagers she enslaved in WandaVision, falls into the least she could have done and she got off too lightly categories. Also like in WandaVision, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness wildly overpromised and underdelivered when it came to cameos and multiverse-hopping shenanigans, yet again subverting expectations in the most boring way possible. Marvel today has a producer and a writer problem, which ultimately boils down to a producer problem as the producers hire the writers. But that was never an issue before, so what is different now? Well, a couple of things. From Phase 1 to Phase 3, Kevin Feige himself served as both producer and creative lead. From Phase 4 onwards, James Gunn was supposed to help him out as creative lead, which is code for that Gunn would be doing all of the heavy lifting in a phase that was initially planned to be mostly cosmic, with some magic on the side. But then James Gunn's old tweets from his trauma days got unearthed, and Alan Horn publicly fired him on the spot. The moment that happened, the original plan and vision for Phase 4 was toast. Gunn would eventually return to direct Guardians of the Galaxy Part 3, so that wasn't too affected, but all the other movies that were supposed to tell the larger phase-spanning narrative were. That's why 6 Disney Plus series and 4 movies into Phase 4, you still can't really tell which of the several hinted at overarching storylines is the main connective tissue here. If it seems haphazard and disorganized, it's because it is. Between all the rights they got back with the Fox acquisition and Netflix cancelling all of their Marvel shows, amidst Feige assuming all of the defunct Marvel Entertainment Division's former responsibilities, as well as the corporate mandate to make a whole host of Disney Plus shows they weren't planning on, Feige's resources were spread too thin to chart out any more MCU phases. That's after all what he hired James Gunn for. Without Gunn then, the other producers, many of whom have an ideological bent, like Victoria Alonso, had to pick up the slack. The result is plainly visible on screen. This producer problem has adversely affected every single MCU project from when WandaVision kicked off Phase 4 and up until now, with Spider-Man No Way Home being the sole genuinely crowd-pleasing fluke. because it was thrown together in a hurry and a creative flurry, in a direct response to Warner and DC bringing back Keaton's Batman for The Flash, a comeback that has since been marred by star Ezra Miller himself, as we've also covered in our DC coverage. Going back to this movie, Doctor Strange is off to a strong start at the box office, but preliminary audience responses already indicate it won't come anywhere near Spider-Man No Way Home. That has got to be disappointing for Marvel, because they spent a lot of money on some pretty extensive reshoots for Doctor Strange prior to releasing it. That of course begs the question, what were those reshoots really about, and what was the movie like before them? We just may have the answer to that, and we will uncover it in our next video. To make sure you don't miss out on that, please like this video, hit subscribe, and indicate you want notifications on all videos. With that, let me know how much you enjoy Doctor Strange and Wanda's storyline in the comments. And before you go, remember to use WinX DVD Ripper to preserve your own physical collection. Hit the link in the description to claim your 90 days free premium edition.